Hello students, today we are going to talk about the famous psychologist Sigmund Freud, and the content of this video will be useful for students of B.Ed, M.Ed, those who are doing their degrees in education, and also for those who are aspiring to write NET exam, National Eligibility Test, and it will be useful for those who are planning to write teacher eligibility test, TET, because that is a paper in psychology where you might be asked about the psychologists like Sigmund Freud. And now let us go into his famous theories. And he is the founder of theory of psychoanalysis. And his findings consist of three main theories or three main hypotheses. What are they? First is, and before that, Sigmund Freud was an Austrian. He was from Austria and he was a neurologist treating patients with mental illness. While doing so, he came across many cases, and studying them, he proposed three theories. The first one is the model. He proposed a model for the mind. And this model for the mind is called the Iceberg model of the mind. And what is the iceberg? Icebergs are big ice structures found in oceans, and they are so huge sometimes they may hit even break the ships passing through that area. And he proposed that the mind has a model of an iceberg. Some of the parts of the minds are below the water and some parts of the mind are above the water. And the part of the mind which is seen above the water, he calls it the conscious mind. That is the mind which is aware of our thoughts, our beliefs, our instincts, our emotions. So that area of the mind he called as the conscious mind. So whatever we are perceiving, whatever we are thinking right now, and whatever ideas we are having, whatever memories we are having, they constitute what is known as the conscious part of our mind. And below which is the subconscious mind. He uses the word preconscious mind, and later on people started using subconscious mind, and where some of the things are in memory. I mean, some of the informations are stored in memory and but right now we are not aware of it. They are not in the conscious mind, but they are still there and we can bring it to our memory. For example, the names of your friends or the telephone numbers of your relatives, all these things are stored in the memory, but right now you are not recollecting it, and right now you are not remembering it. But with a little effort, you can bring it to memory. They are called, that part of the mind is called preconscious mind or the subconscious mind, below which lies the most important part of the mind, that is the unconscious mind. The one which we are not aware of, which is hidden from our perception. This is very important part of the mind, because so many of our behavior and our personality is influenced by what is there, what is stored in the unconscious mind. Why we are not aware of it? Because those are hidden there. They are repressed or suppressed in our unconscious mind. Only if you come to know what is hidden there in your unconscious mind, we can rectify the physiological symptoms we are seeing in the person. Many of the mental illness, or according to Freud, many of the mental illness are due to some of the suppressed ideas or the repressed ideas which are hidden in the unconscious mind. And according to me, if we bring out the unconscious ideas into the conscious mind, most of the diseases will disappear. And this is what is the aim of his psychoanalysis, which we are going to discuss at the end, the third part of this video, psychoanalysis. This is psychoanalysis is a method, a clinical method which he used to treat patients with mental illness or behavioral problems, where he will retrieve the ideas or the hidden emotions or the hidden thoughts, feelings from the unconscious minds to the conscious mind. So that way the symptoms, the physical symptoms or the psychological symptoms are relieved. And so in this model for the mind, he proposes three parts of the mind, namely the conscious mind, which is aware of all our feelings, thoughts, and emotions. And then comes the preconscious mind, which is there but which is not outside, which is not visible to our conscious mind, but still we can get access to it by a little bit of effort, by remembering it, recalling it, recognizing it, And the last part of the mind is the unconscious one, which is hidden, which is underneath, and which is a reservoir. It's a repository of all our repressed or suppressed feelings and emotions. And all those ideas later on in a child, when the child develops into adulthood, all these repressed emotions will have an effect on the personality of the child. And now the second theory of Sigmund Freud is again, he proposed another model for the mind later on, and this comprises of three elements, namely id, ego, and superego. And these are also the parts of the mind, but they are not physical areas in the mind or in the brain, but they are hypothetical constructs. What is a hypothesis? It's a tentative statement. It's a tentative solution. And these three areas, id, ego, and superego, every child has to pass through these three stages of the mind, id, ego, and superego. And this classification of the mind into id, ego, and superego is based on the zone of pleasure. He calls it as libido. Libido is the energy which is derived. For Sigmund Freud, everything is, all the energy is derived from the sexual urge or the sexual drive. So this energy he terms as libido. There are a lot of terminology he uses in his psychoanalysis. Libido and repression and aid, catharsis, and suppressed ideas. These became very famous later on in the treatment of mentally ill patients. And these three zones, the more parts of the mind, they are based on the pleasure zones or the libido zones. So the id is governed by the pleasure principle, and the superego is just the opposite of the id area. The superego is governed by moral ethical principle, while id is governed by the pleasure principle. And this is the lowly evolved part of the mind. All the child has to pass through all the three stages, and the ego is in between id and superego. Now let us see in detail what each one is about and how it affects a person or a child in development. The id means ID. I demand immediate gratification. ID. I demand immediate gratification. What is gratification? It is the satisfaction of your needs, satisfying your urges, satisfying your instincts. So I want this, I want this, I want to do this, I want to eat this. These are all basic instinct or urges that we have seen in another video. So this id principle always works on the pleasure. So it always needs to have immediate gratification, immediate pleasure. So it will not compromise for anything else. And this is usually seen in the case of children. You all know that children they want immediate gratification. If they want something, they will immediately cry for it. But we adults, we don't do it. Suppose a child wants to eat chocolate, you know what it will do? Even if another child, the neighbor child, has got a chocolate, immediately it will go and snatch it, or it will cry for the chocolate. Cry, and it will make a lot of tantrums to the mother asking for the chocolate of the neighbors. But on the other hand, as the child develops, once it becomes a boy of 6 or 7 years old, he develops the superego. What is that superego? The moral ethical principle. The superego is governed always by the moral ethical principle. We have learnt during the course of time, the child would have learnt a lot of moral principles, like one should be true to oneself, one should be honest, and we should not desire for others' property, and we should not cry in public. So many things we develop, ethical principles, moral principles, by going to school, by going to or even from other parents, from social institutions. They learn a lot of behavior, socially acceptable behaviors. So superego starts developing. So in that case, a superego prevents the child from snatching the chocolate from the neighbor's hand. So now in between is the ego principle. What does ego do? The superego says that it is not yours. You cannot have the chocolate. Chocolate is bad for your health. It is bad for your teeth. So do not take chocolate. That is the superego principle. But ego is in between. It acts as a referee between the id and the superego. Because of the pleasure driving principle and the moral driving principle, the child develops an internal conflict. So something inside is going on, that whether to have the chocolate, because the id is driving you to snatch it from the other child. But the superego is prohibiting it, not to have it. You are a big boy, you cannot eat chocolate, and all those moral principles also playing in your mind. So there is a internal conflict going on in your mind. So now the ego comes as the referee in between the id and the superego. And what does it do? It compromises between both the extremes, the id pleasure principle and the superego moral principle. It says, okay, you cannot take the chocolate that is belonging to another child, but you can always buy one. So you go to your mother, you ask for a chocolate. If you finish your homework, please, mom, buy me a chocolate. So in that way, he postpones his desire, postpones the gratification of the desire, postpones the satisfying the needs. So this is what the child learns as he grows. So that is where the ego part comes into play. So the ego is called the reality principle. It works on the reality. What is the real situation? You cannot fully act on the it based on your pleasure principle alone. You cannot always act according to your impulses, isn't it? So, and also at the same time, you cannot always act according to your superego. So always it is governed by the morality and ethical principles. Don't do that, don't do this, don't do it. Is not possible in this world. Somewhere you have to strike a balance in between this pleasure principle and the moral principle. Somewhere you need to satisfy your urges, instinct in a socially acceptable way. That is the most important thing. You can satisfy your needs, urges, instincts, whatever the instinct may be, the desire to eat or the desire to indulge in some pleasure activity. You can fulfill, but in a socially acceptable way. What is a socially acceptable way? That you can do it in the specified time, in a specified manner. Like you can make use of your cell phones or WhatsApp, but not during the class hours, right? Your teacher insists you to not to use it during the class hour when the lecture is going on. So that way your id, pleasure principle, is also satisfied and your moral principle, superego, is also satisfied. In between, a solution is arrived. So for that action, the ego comes into play. So this is the model for the mind that is proposed by Sigmund Freud. And now comes the third part of our video, namely the most important one, is that Sigmund Freud's stages of psychosexual development. So he proposed 5 stages for any adult in his life. What are they? They are, the first stage is called oral, the second one anal stage, and the third one is phallic, and the fourth one is latent, and the fifth one is genital stage. So you can remember these 5 stages by remembering the mnemonic. You know what is mnemonic is? A short word or a short phrase which is easy to remember. So if you remember that mnemonic, the word, you can easily remember the concept associated with it. Like VibGR, we do not, it is not easy to remember the colors of the rainbow in order, like violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange and red. But if you remember the word VibGR, the first letter of all the colors, then it is easy to recall the names of the 7 colors in the rainbow. It is called, this term, the small term is called mnemonics. It's a device, memory device. Okay, so we are going to use that memory device very often in our videos, because it is very, very important that you devise your own mnemonics instead of, but VibGR is very common, very popular, that we don't waste our time and energy to find a new term for the colors in a rainbow. But for other terms, other concepts and all the other subjects, if it is very useful if we coin our own mnemonic, so that it will be easier for us to remember and recall it anytime. Okay, so for this stages of psychosexual development, we have got a mnemonic, and it is the oral, anal, old age pensioners love grapes. So this is a sentence: old age pensioners love grapes. So old, O for oral, and age, anal, pensioners, P, phallic, and love, latent, love grapes, G for genitals. So the 5 stages in order, or you have to remember them in order, because the child passes through all the 5 stages. As it matures, it passes through these 5 stages in order, starting from oral to the genital stage. And this 5 stages classification of psychoanalysis, or the stages of psychoanalysis development by Sigmund Freud, is based on the location of the libido, location of the pleasure principle, location of the pleasure parts of the body, where the child derives immense satisfaction, from which part of the body he derives gratification or the satisfaction. Based on that, these 5 stages are classified. So the oral part, the locus or the center of pleasure is in the oral, means mouth. So the pleasure part is the mouth part of a child. You all know that when the child is born, when it is few months old, and even when it is 2 years old or 3 years old, its pleasure point remains the mouth. You have noticed a child always grabbing things and putting them into its mouth. Why? Because it derives pleasure When it is away from mother, when it is away from father, it puts something into the mouth. Even when with the mother, it breastfeeding. What is it? It grabs the breast of the mother, and the newborn child can suck the breast, suck the milk. How did it learn? Who taught it? The basic pleasure principle. So this stage is called the oral stage. And during the development of the child, if the parents are too strict, that they don't allow the child to put anything into their mouth, even if the child is prevented from breastfeeding, some of the parents, some of the mothers, they don't give breastfeeding. That is another issue. So that will lead to some of the psychological problems in the child's later on in life. So that is one of the reasons the doctors say that the child should be given breastfeeding for the initial 6 months or 8 months, because emotional bonding is developed during that period. And if that is prevented for the child, later on it will lead to some behavioral problems, some mental illness for the child. That is called fixation by Sigmund Freud. The child gets fixed at this oral stage. What will happen later on when it becomes an adult, a boy or an adolescent? It will become, it will have behavioral problem, like it will get addicted to cigarettes because it has got something to do with the mouth. So it gets into the bad habit of smoking. Or some of them may keep on talking. You might have noticed some people, they just can't shut their mouth. They keep on talking, using their mouth forever and ever. They think they can succeed in life. They can win anything by opening their mouth or talking. So that is because of some of they got fixed at the oral stage. Their development did not take place properly. The parents might have exercised greater control in the child, like not allowing the child to put it in the. Some of the times you have to allow the child to put some of the things in their mouth for some time, but not always. You have to strike a balance between when to allow, when not to allow. So you should fulfill the child's desire to some extent, and you should control the child to some extent. So that for a normal development for the child. Otherwise, it will get fixated at the oral stage. And later on, what will happen? They develop sort of addiction to the mouth region. Some of them may show symptoms like eating, keep on eating. Whatever they see, they cannot stop eating. So that is another psychological behavior that may set in later on in their later life. So one has got to be aware of this and be moderate in allowing the child to put things in their mouth. And this is the oral stage. And the next stage is the anal stage, when the libido or the point of energy, the center of energy is in the anus. Anus is the excretory organs. What are the excretory organs? That is what are excretory organs? They excrete the waste material from our body. The child, in the beginning, when the child is small, it has the tendency to pee anywhere and everywhere. So the parents slowly teach them toilet training. So while doing this also, the parents have got to be on the guard, like not allowing them too much of liberty, like to allowing them to pee anywhere and everywhere. Or at the same time, they should not be very, very strict also. That is, not allowing them to pee in any time, very specific time and very specific area. That also, controlling too much also will lead to problems later on in the child's development. So that is what is the main aim of toilet training: where to go, when to control, and the child learns it in the due course of time. So too much of control will lead to a characteristic and the personality of the adult called as the expulsive personality. That is too much of laxity. That is, if the parents are very lenient, allowing the child to be anywhere and everywhere, that will lead to expulsive personality, where the child will be very disorganized. You will see in his behavior that in anything and everything he does, he will be disorganized. His table will be messy, and his dress will be messy, and his behavior will be messy. And that may be due to the parents' lenience in the early stage. And also the other extreme, that is being too strict, stringent on the child, may lead to what is known as the retentive personality. That is, if the parents are very strict with the child, like you should not be just for a child of 2 years old, you cannot be so very strict. Like you can go only during this break. No, that is not possible. If the situation, if the emergency comes, the teacher or the parent has to allow the child to use the restroom. So this may lead to the retentive personality, where the adult will be very, very obsessive. Like he will be very organized. He cannot tolerate even the smallest deviation. So that is also practically impossible in a life, to be orderly every minute and every walk of life. Is it possible? No, you have to, certain extent, you have to adapt to the situation. So that is also affected during the early stage of development. That is called the second stage of psychoanalysis, psychosexual development, that is the anal stage. And the third stage is the phallic stage. And actually this is phallic stage, where the libido or the zone of pleasure, it's also called as ergo zones. The zones of pleasure is also known as ergo zones. And this libido is located in the genital organs. You know, the genital organs are the reproductive organs. And the clitoris and the vagina for the females. And the penis is the reproductive organ for the boys. And so the pleasure, zone of pleasure is in the genitals. So this phallic area is characterized by the likings towards the opposite sex. So in this stage, the child starts developing they come to distinguish between the boy and the girl. They start interest in the opposite sex. They become curious about the opposite sex. And also during this stage, Sigmund Freud describes two complexes which may develop. They are the Oedipus Complex and the Electrocomplex. What is Oedipus Complex? So this is Oedipus, it is a psychological disorder. Oedipus Complex is the more attraction towards mother by the son. The son is attracted more towards his mother. He develops a sort of attraction towards the mother, disliking his father. This is called the Oedipus Complex. And sometimes in one of his Shakespeare's play, a character which has diagnosed with Oedipus Complex, he goes to the extent of killing his father to marry the mother. And then over self-repenting, he blinds his eye. So this is called this complex is called Oedipus Complex, where the son develops likings towards the mother. And the opposite of is the Electrocomplex, where the daughter develops more likings towards the father. And this way they start hating the other parent. And they start to even sometimes mimic the other parent in order to get the attraction of the father or the mother. So the Oedipus Complex develops when the son is attracted towards the mother, and the Electrocomplex is when the daughter is attracted more towards the father, hating the mother. The extent may vary depending on the personality. And the next stage is the latent stage. And this is actually not a exact stage in psychosexual development, because it doesn't have the ergo zone or the zone of pleasure or the libido zone. And it is usually in this stage, it is from 3 years old to the puberty stage, where they develop other interests. The child develops other interests like sports, like friendship among the same sex. And so only this period you see a lot of friendship develops, and they develop interest in sports and in studies. They are interested in all these activities. They forget about the zone of pleasure, and this is latent period or the resting period. And the fifth one is the genital, where it is starting from puberty. It goes on throughout the adult life, where the zone of pleasure is located on the sex organs. As I've told you, the clitoris and the vagina for the females and the penis for the boys. And that forms the adulthood. That is the genital stage. So in this way, Sigmund Freud classifies the stages of psychosexual development into 5 stages, and these are very important. And any stage, the development during each stage is very important. The role of the parents and the caretaker and the teachers are very important in these stages for the child to successfully complete each stage without any fixation, so that later on in their adulthood they will not have any mental illness or any psychological problem. So in this way, this theory of psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud has gained a lot of significance and lot of appreciation, and it has become very popular, and it was used very often as a clinical method to treat mental illness. I hope this video is helpful for all the students doing education as their subject or psychology. We will meet again in another video, and if you like this video, please click the bell icon, and also don't forget to subscribe to this video. Thank you.